On today's episode of Gathering the Kings.
I didn't actually raise money. So all of my acquisitions, at the beginning, I had no money.
You did an incredible job of laying that out. I mean, this is actually like a blueprint. Like you just gave it step by step by step. I know this to be true because I've done it. This podcast just became that because of you. So thank you. What's up, everybody? I'm Chaz Wolfe, Gathering the Kings podcast, coming back to you here today with another king on the stage from another part of the world yet again. Adrian Knight, my brother, how we doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Chaz. How are you?
We are rocking and rolling. We've already had an incredible conversation. I had to hurry up quick and hit the record button because we were just having such a great time. Tell us, Adrian, what kind of business do you have and where are you located?
Yep. So I'm based in England, so just outside of London, just west of London. And my business is, well, we're in the children's education space. So we've got a small group of companies. We currently educate just under 10,000 5-year-olds every academic term here in the UK.
Wow.
And I've built this business entirely through acquisition, purely through buying other businesses and putting them together.
I love, I mean, first off, congratulations. There might be some people listening going, wait, what? What? That's amazing. All through acquisition. And on top of that, it's all, children's education. Tell us a little bit more. What's inside of this portfolio of acquisitions that you've made?
Yeah, so we've currently got 3 companies. 2 of them are national franchise networks. So we bought the franchisors. I come from the franchise sector in the UK, so I understand the dynamics and what it takes to be a franchisor. That gives us like a national and a slight international presence as well. The third company is a recent acquisition which focuses on outdoor learning environments. So we're looking at like playgrounds and outdoor spaces that we can shape with sort of educational goals in mind. So the whole thought process has been we're currently educating inside the classroom. Now we want to start educating outside the classroom and
Yeah.
integrating them together.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a lot of people, in this space, not necessarily child education, although here in America, I'm not sure if it's a big deal over there, but there is a huge spike of homeschool and just this idea of education doesn't have to be in this, sit in a square for 8 hours, do what you're told type of mentality. And it sounds like you're on that track as well. We've recently started to homeschool and everything that we had kind of longed for as far as the experiential learning is now possible because we've just created a life where we can do this. But it sounds like you're doing it for the masses, which is pretty cool because I'm not seeing that done, here in America.
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. I mean, all of this has stemmed from a frustration, I guess. I
That's
mean,
right.
I was terrible at school. I was terrible with academics. I barely passed. And a lot of the stuff that I learned has just been so unapplicable in sort of the real world, I guess. But I didn't really think much more of it. I never sort of set out to go into education or to have any major role in it. It was only when I became a dad that's when things started to change for me because, like pretty much every other new parent, this little person, I've got a 4-year-old daughter, was completely turning my life upside down, inside out in the most amazing way. And I was thoroughly enjoying like my new role as a dad. And it was when I was attending her classes. I mean, so Evie, yeah, I mean, what, sort of 6 months, sort of like beyond, like we go to like the local, or we would go to the local sort of children's activities to help develop her motor skills and all those key skills that are so important
Yeah.
to growing a sort of a happy and healthy adult. And as I was attending those, like I was just amazed. Like it just felt so it was almost like the child's education was at the bottom of the priority list. It was about
Yeah.
the person running those groups and trying to get bums on seats and all of that stuff. And I just felt, I don't know, I just felt moved by it. Like it bothered me.
Yeah.
And as it would happen, a series of like synchronistic events happened. And this was all around the time of COVID, where I ultimately reached a point, like a decision point, where I sort of said to myself, I'm going to have a play in this sector. And I don't mean like just mess about, but I'm going to play a role in it. I don't care how big it is. It's not about that. I just feel as though it's my duty almost to do something and just to have a little yeah, just to have a little involvement. If I can touch one child's life, then it's been absolutely worth it.
Yeah.
I never would have thought, like, never would have thought that we'd be like where we are today,
Yeah.
and the path that we're on as well. So it's been an amazing ride.
Yeah, that's incredible. I appreciate you going into further detail. And your 4-year-old daughter holds a position or 2 in your company,
It's
right? What does she do?
She's chief inspiration officer for starters. So, and
I love it.
this is what's been so beautiful about this for me, because this all started because of Evie. And when, I mean, she had just turned 1. It was within a week of her turning 1 when I made that decision, and she's now 4. And seeing how the group and the business has grown along with her. And a few weeks ago, we was at our annual national franchise conference for all of our franchisees, and I was all asking, "How's Evie?" and sort of showing photos, and oh my gosh, she just started school, and it's just been this most amazing journey. So
Yeah.
yeah, Evie is definitely the driving inspiration behind this, because now she's moving into, sort of primary education. It's a different level of education. We're now starting to turn our attention to, sort of like school and like the next steps in that educational ladder.
Yeah. I love it, man. I love that you're, integrating the things that are important to you outside of the business into the business. Of course, for you, that duty that you talked about, we all, as entrepreneurs, we feel that at some point. We've felt that moment where it was like, I can do this better, or there's a calling here. There's just something that I'm supposed to be part of. It. There's a duty. There's, there's something that we're called to in those ways. And so I can feel the depth of that for you,
Mm.
obviously associated to your little girl. And with me having little girls, it's a fire, man. As a dad, as a business owner, you combine those things together. Whew, now we're getting into, mixing emotion with great desire. It's like, well, we're reading Thinking Grow Rich over here together, just this is
It's
how it
so
works.
true. Yeah, it's so true, because I had many failed startups before I started to see success in business. And what I can see now with absolute clarity, of the benefit of hindsight, is that the why, the central
Yeah,
reason, is not about money. Like it has to be commercially viable,
sure.
but that why is so burning and so strong. That's been the driving force of all of this, and it's so tightly linked to my daughter.
Yeah.
So
Well, you've given us a little bit of the backdrop. I want to know practically, because you've just kind of led on to a little bit of a secret here that you've been a failure, a really big failure. Kind of over and over and over again, and so have I. So have everybody who's been listening, right? But you've been able to turn those things into who you are today, per what you were just saying. And so I want to talk about your journey just a little bit. I want you to talk about kind of what led you to the point of being able to say to yourself, "This is my duty." So give us a little bit of the backdrop, and then we'll get into some of your acquisitions. Just give us a little bit of the what you were doing before. How were you failing?
yeah, well, just to lay out the context, I've had 12 failed startups. So I know I am, and I consider myself a terrible startup entrepreneur. And I've learned over the years that there are different flavors of entrepreneurs, and that was a real turning point, I think, for me, just having that insight.
Yeah.
But I started young, like a lot of entrepreneurs. So for me, it was paper rounds. I had several when I was just 15 years old, but I didn't actually do any of them myself. I'd like franchised them out to my friends, and I was working in the paper shop, and ultimately won Paper Boy of the Year. So I was pretty chuffed with that. I then went to university, dropped out after 3 weeks, but in that 3 week period, I'd started a students events company,
Yeah.
and ended up staying for 3 years as well. So I had a great time there. And they were probably my biggest successes before coming into the world of acquisitions. With my startups, there was many different flavors, ranging from recruitment to marketing to training. But I kept coming up against the same barrier, which was myself. Like,
Mhm.
it was some fundamental lack of skills and a fundamental like mismatch of skill sets, I kind of want to say,
Okay.
that just kept me hitting the same hurdles until again, it was when I found out that we was expecting Evie, when I looked at my life and I looked at where things were, and it was probably my most successful startup that I was running, but successful in the sense that it hadn't failed. and I had a small team of people, but I wasn't making any money. I was working every hour under the sun. And I just recognized that something needed to change here. And now I had this little girl coming along who was relying on me, not just financially, but relying on me to be a role model, a dad, someone who can guide her through life. And it was just so powerful. I wasn't prepared to give up my hopes and my dreams and my aspirations. I just wasn't prepared to do that. But I was like, right, I've been hitting my head against the wall so long trying this path. Why don't I try a different path, but goes to the same place?
Yeah. Okay, so that little piece there, that shift, you're referring to rather than starting something, buy something, acquisition. Is that the aha, the epiphany moment that you had?
It was, yes, because I recognized that my skill set, like I was quite good at problem solving. I certainly am an action taker. Like I get in and I'm not afraid to just roll my sleeves up and do whatever needs doing essentially. But I felt that, and I instinctively felt that that skill set would be far more valuable where in a business where all of the other pieces that I wasn't very good at had already been taken care of. And
Yeah.
so when you buy a business, like there's no question about it, you're buying a bunch of problems. And quite often, that's part of the reason why the seller wants to go. And so fundamentally, when you start to look at a number of different businesses from a like an acquisition perspective, you realize, well, they've got two or three or maybe a handful of problems. But if I can solve those, it's going to be a good business here. And that was my theory in a way, and it proved to be fairly accurate. So I went in, excuse me, I'm kind of like collapsing the time period in
No,
here
it's
because it's
good,
quite
man.
a
This is
lot to
good.
buy in the business. But my first acquisition, I went in, solved the first few problems, and all of a sudden, I've got a business that's
Yeah.
running, and
Cranking.
yeah, and it doesn't require me in the day to day. I'm like, this is cool. Why don't I do another one? And it just kind of like went from there.
Yeah. Okay, so in this moment that you had this realization of I have a certain skill sets, or maybe you didn't have certain skill sets
Yeah,
to kind of get it, started, which I think is a huge self-awareness thing. We can go into, what kind of reflection that you did and how did you even come to that? But for the sake of this one, because this storyline is so unique, for you to be able to flip the switch and then just boom, 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 one after the other, like really press in. And so for the listener right now who's maybe wondering, man, maybe that's the reason why I've got multiple failed startups. Maybe I don't have certain skills, or maybe I have a different skill set that might be better off purchasing a business. It sounds a little bit too good to be true. I can purchase a business, solve a couple of problems, and then like it doesn't need me. This is amazing. I know that there's obviously more than that. I've purchased a couple of businesses, but give us the understanding right now for the person listening for either the skill set that they might be missing that's keeping them away from getting that startup off the ground, or what skill set do they have that they can identify, both sides of the coin there, that would be like you, where maybe purchasing a business would be a better fit for them.
Absolutely. So I mean, the first realization and point of awareness that led me down this path was understanding, like really understanding at a deep level that I was the commonality with all these failures, but
Yeah.
I was the bottleneck. And so by taking me out of like the operational aspects, because that's where I was falling short, I was too much of an entrepreneur and not enough of a manager or a
Mm,
CEO, whatever that label is, and they're two very different skill sets. And this I've seen as businesses like evolves from being like a six-figure business to a seven and an eight, across the range, that there becomes this separation between like the entrepreneur and the manager. And when that happens, that's when the business really starts to take off. So
yeah.
for me, it was the awareness that if I could almost start there, then surely the chances of success would be higher. But for myself, like I would identify as a typical visionary type skill set. So you can see the big picture, good at solving big problems in a very creative way, good with people, good at sales. And these are things that like key skills that you need for buying a business because first of all, the process of buying a business and engaging with a seller is very much a sales process. And
Totally.
it's not like a transactional thing. Like this is a deeply personal, like you're dealing with someone's livelihood. They've been building this for 15, 20, 30 years plus, and you need to
Yeah.
respect that. And you need to understand what's driving them to be talking to you in the first place. And it's never just the finances, like never.
Yeah.
So you need to understand that. So those skills as a visionary come in really well. And then when you go into the business, you're good at this solving these big problems that the previous owner didn't want to address or just couldn't face it.
Yeah.
Well, now you're really working in your sweet spot. The skills that I was lacking was very much, I'm sort of using like the rocket fuel, like visionary integrator. So it's
Yep.
like the operational aspects, the ability to line people up. I say that sort of lightly, but the ability to get, things aligned and to be consistently moving forward, beating to the same drum.
Yeah.
That was where I just kept falling short. So with my startup, I'd have this amazing idea. I could see the gap in the market. I was the only one who could see it. I would get things moving with loads of like energy and let's go. And then you go forward 2 steps and plonk, it would stop because I couldn't do what came with that. And
Yeah.
so if you are, if you listen to this and you recognize or identify with one of those two, then certainly if you're more the visionary, then it really could be a
Yeah.
very viable way for you to grow.
Yeah. I think you did an excellent job there of describing the two, and also the difference, or just the maybe the need that you had, but also the skill set that it was good for. I think that for most people listening right now, entrepreneurs by a vast majority are going to fall into the visionary bucket.
Mm.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody knows what you're talking about as far as just, don't waste your time with starting something fresh. In essence, what Adrian's saying is that your skill set is high level, solving problems, and it's not building. And so there's systems, process, teams, people, accountability, meetings, all of those things for most entrepreneurs are like dreadful. It's actually why they stepped away from working for somebody else. And so everything that Adrian's saying is like, okay, the very passion and excitement that started the business is the very thing that holds it back, because it needs order in order to be successful.
Yeah.
And typically people, but then on top of that, entrepreneurs, especially big visionary personalities, are maybe a little slower to order. Yeah. And that's okay. There's still value there for us to be orderly, but there's even more value in having something like a business or a team that is operating on that thing, and we don't have to be the driving force. My question inside of this is, if someone right now is listening and they're like, okay, well, so I'm going to go buy a business then. This makes perfect sense. I'm going to, give up this idea of either starting something, or I've been fumbling around with something for 2 or 3 years and it's just frustrating. I'm going to start looking at buying a business. What should I be looking for? Is there a certain size? Is there, like criteria that you had in your mind? Because if I just go buy a little 2 or 300, $400,000 business, another person's startup, that's probably not going to solve my problem. So give us a little insight here, is what you're thinking.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So there are like there are sort of criteria that you want to use as guidelines. And I say guidelines because it doesn't have to be set in stone. My first acquisition was smaller in revenue, and I realized very quickly that I'd essentially acquired a job. And so you have to be mindful of that. So terms of the type of things you want to look for from a revenue perspective, certainly 500,000 in revenue and above, ideally around 1 million. And the reason why is because if a business is doing 500,000 or ideally 1 million, then it would suggest that it's not just the owner, like there's a small team of people in there. And so you're leapfrogging that first startup phase, because once, if you are more of a visionary, once you have a team of people around you who can compensate you, then you start to re-engage as an entrepreneur and you can be more effective in like within a business. It's just if you don't have a team at the start, then you may be hitting those like 100, 200K revenue glass ceilings for such a long time, like I did. So 500,000 in revenue up. When you get to around 5 million in revenue, you tend to be moving into the realm of where private equity are starting to play, and you're coming into like the lower middle market sector. So the way I always think about it and define it is that micro businesses are essentially sort of like startup up to around 500,000. Then you're sort of coming into like smaller businesses with 500,000 revenue being the real bottom end of that. But then as you come up to around 5 million, you're coming into the lower middle market sector, which is a very different world. Personally, I like businesses that sit between 1 million and 3 million in revenue, because there's enough there to get going. But quite often the major bottlenecks and the major problems stem from the owner of the business,
Yeah.
because they've grown it from a startup. So the very fact of moving them out of the picture and having more like ingredients almost to work with, you've got a slightly bigger team, you've got more cash flow, you've got more resources available to you, makes it very interesting in what you can do. And it immediately opens you up to several different, oh, I could do this or go this way, and like different ways of sort of building value on that. Alongside revenue, you need to look at team as well. Team is very important, and also the age of business. So personally, I don't like looking at businesses that are less than 10 years old. At the very minimum, I'd look at a business that's 5 years old, but that's really the minimum. Like 10 years old suggests that they are a business and they've got their place in the market, and they've been through or been around the block a couple of times. So they're a little bit, worn, and you've got an actual business there. I certainly don't look at startups at all for all the reasons I failed, and team as well. So the people in the business will be one of your biggest challenges. And
Yeah.
I've had this with my last acquisition, like the people in there, it was almost a little bit like sort of going back to the 80s in terms of the mentality and the mindset, and working or trying to work with that, or some cases around that, has been extremely challenging. So you just want to be mindful. If everything lines up on paper, if the numbers look right, if the circumstances and the conversation you have with the owner look good, what do
Right.
the people in the business look like? And it's so hard to know that, because quite often the owner of the business doesn't want you to engage with the team and to
Mhm.
scare them off.
That's right.
But it's a really big thing. It's one of your biggest risks, because if you're buying a business with 10 people, like a small business with 10 people,
Mhm.
first of all, that's actually quite a big small business. A
Mhm.
lot of people don't get to that size. But if two of those people leave, that's 20% of your workforce. What do you do there? And so,
Wow.
yeah, it's something you need to take or approach very consciously.
Yeah. You've given some really, really key points I want to press in here. First off, I have to say that all of our Gathering the Kings members get access to Culture Index. Culture Index
Mm.
is a personality assessment, but it's just so much more than that. With a 91% accuracy, we can, in this example, we can have the seller, the owner, take surveys of his team. They don't have to know that he's selling the business. They can take a survey around, personal development and, training and all that fun stuff. But then as the buyer, I can see every single person in a chart, and I can see what their job description is, if there is one. And I can see their their traits and in the seat that they're in, and whether it's the right fit.
Yep.
Now, of course, I can't tell, moral standards and, personal compass, stuff like that. But those things can be done a little further into due diligence, especially if you're getting close, to pulling the trigger. I do want to press into this team thing though, because
Yeah.
it's a big deal. Taking over a team is completely different than building a team. And there's negatives and positives to both. I had my first acquisition of a team back when I was a sales manager. I was promoted to a sales manager. This was, 20 years ago. And
Mm.
I'm just a kid. And there was two of us that got promoted at the same time. One got promoted to build his own team, and I got promoted to take over the top team. And a lot of people thought I had just won the lottery and it was given just a silver platter. And in some respects, the things you talked about, there was already people there was already production happening. I got to step right into commission. But this team, I was not their leader. In fact, in the meeting, literally, the guy who got promoted to director was in the meeting. It was his team. He got promoted, then I took his spot. He's in the meeting and he's like, "Hey guys, here's Chaz. He's your new manager." One of the ladies on the team was like, "Why can't you just be our manager still?" And I'm standing right there. So I'm kind of alluding to maybe some of the difficulty of taking over a team, but talk about it from your perspective, because you've done it now multiple times, and maybe in comparison to building your own. Hey, kings and queens, Chaz Wolfe. I want to talk to you about something that's super important to me. We put a lot of time and effort, we meaning myself and my team, into this podcast, into the content that goes out every single day. And if you have been getting any sort of value or insight from this, we want it to be able to reach other business owners too. So we would love if you would like, comment, share, leave a review, post, share again, all of the things on social media, on all the different platforms, or even on the podcast mediums of Apple and Spotify. We would love to be able to get our content into more hands, more entrepreneurs, so they can grow their business as quick as possible. Together, we are building a community of like-minded entrepreneurs who are committed to growing their businesses to new heights. So let's do this. Let's help each other. Let's help each other grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to touch on the personality profiling as well, because I mean, I've done 9, 10 acquisitions over the last few years, and it was only in the latest one where I had the foresight to start personality profiling, and even then I didn't do the whole team. And moving forward, I would absolutely build that within the due diligence process, so I have a much better understanding of what's going on. It's such a big thing. Going into a team is an interesting dynamic, and this is where some of the visionary skill sets and traits come into play, because you're inspirational and you've got energy, and you go in and you need to have a vision, like, for the business. Like, you need to buy them in, just like any, if you're building your own team. But you go in and you kind of lay it out the line, but you do it in a way that's subtle at first, but then you just start to, you have to put your boundaries into place quite quickly, because just like a child or a puppy, they will test your boundaries and see, right, where is the line. And so going into it, you have to appreciate that it's not a popularity contest. Not everyone's going to like you. There's almost certainly going to be, it's around 20% from experience of the workforce that are adamantly against you, but they may not say it to your face as well. So my approach has been, and this is just this has come from just doing this and going through this process, and I still feel there's a lot of learning for me to do. But I would go in and I would always want to stand there with the owner or the owners, and we've already signed the paperwork, and we'd let them know, and we'd make it an open floor and go through questions. Then I would make sure I'm basically, for the week following that, I am so accessible, and I am normally, but even more so. I'm almost putting myself in their faces, and I'm making this vision very clear, and I'm not just saying it once. I'm right, and I'm getting them G'd up, and starting to get them aligned. And what that does is you start to observe, who do I actually think's on this, and who do I don't. The next thing I do is within 2 weeks of signing that paperwork, I make it very clear. When I'm up there with the owners, I was right, we're gonna sit down and have a one-to-one within the next 2 weeks. That's all I say. And in those one-to-ones, it's very much open to their open floor. How long do you like working here? What are the problems? Tell me from your perspective, what exactly do you do? And I get all of that, and I really want them to download, and I won't move past that until I feel that they have been thoroughly heard and understood. And so I'm repeating that back, and that process, I've had some of those meetings, they last half an hour, some of them they last 3, and that's fine. I've cleared my diary. These are so important. But as we sort of shift from I've listened and I truly understand them, I then start to make it clear from my side. And I say, look, this is the vision. And I start to put more detail and more scaffolding around that. This is what it's going to look like. This is what the next 12 months, how I want them to go. And this is what it means we have to start doing in the next 3 months. And then kind of the final point to this, and this is the key bit, is I make it absolutely clear. And I ask them, say, do you want to be part of this? Is this a journey for you? Because if it's not, that's absolutely fine. I completely understand. This is not for everyone. I've come in this, I've invested money into this, although people will assume that in various ways, because I've never invest my own money, but I've still, money has been invested.
Yeah. And
So
you're
I make it
responsible.
clear that, absolutely. I'm responsible. So I make it very clear that I've got a lot on the line here. And so I need people to be on board with that. And yeah, it's interesting because some people, very few, but some people say, you know what, it's just not for me.
Yeah.
Others will say, actually, yeah, I want to be part of this. But you can see within a matter of weeks that they either don't have the skill set, the appetite, or they don't really want to say that. They were just buying time for their job. And that's fine as well, because you're weeding them out very early.
That's
And
right.
then others come away completely motivated and they're part of this and they start driving the business. And then you
Yeah.
start to see who your allies are,
Hmm.
and then very quickly, just to sort of the final point on this, because there's so much to the people side. The
Very true.
final point on this is that I start bringing in my own people. So I start recruiting, I start hiring, and when you hire someone, they are naturally loyal to you. And
Hmm.
so I quite like to make 2 or 3 hires, depending on the size of the business, quite quickly. Then it dilutes the old crew, and maybe one person's left, and you start to figure this out. But it does take time. There's no question about that. But if you can do that within 6 months, you've done really well. But boy, is it time well spent.
Yeah, you did an incredible job of laying that out. I really hope that the listener, I mean, this is actually like a blueprint. Like you just gave it step by step by step. And I know this to be true because I've done it and I've seen multiple people do the exact same steps. I don't know if there's like a 7-step formula somewhere or whatever, but this podcast just became that because of you. So thank you. In all seriousness, it this flow of how you take care of the people psychologically, but yet set boundaries, yet set a vision, invite them in. All of those things are very strategic. And then, of course, the last little piece there of bringing in other people, it that's always the solution, in my opinion, when building a
Mm,
team. Just like there's the solution
yeah.
always to every problem in business is growth. Just go sell another deal. Now, I don't say that lightly, just oversell and create problems. I just mean that most likely the problem is you just like growth solves everything. Inside of a team building, it's like growth, just go hire somebody else. Because as soon as you do, as long as you're hiring
Hmm.
properly and specifically personalities for a specific role and job description, they're loyal to you, like you said, but then it's just fresh energy, fresh meat. It stirs the pot. And that's, I feel like as leaders, that's what we're constantly doing. Not stirring the pot from like an uneasy, I want confusion and unrest. I want the pot to be stirred because we always want to be, going to the next level, getting better and better and better. And some people just don't think like that. And so we need them to kind of go away, you know?
But it's actually I think you hit on a really critical point here when the context of buying a business, because when you go into it, like there are problems, and those problems they tend to stem from inadequate systems or lack of. And so part of the role to a degree is kicking the tire and creating a bit of chaos in a controlled manner, which again lends very well to a visionary, because I'm brilliant at making chaos. Like I can
Yeah.
do it all day, every day. And unfortunately I do sometimes. And you kind of need to do that, but you need to do it in a controlled manner where and select your timing. So everybody's like had to talk and they've been through that initial phase. And then you start like kicking things and making changes. And that's when you really see where people are at. The worst thing you can do in many ways is go in and just do business as normal. But I say that sort of lightly because you don't want to change so much that you fundamentally change what you've bought,
Right.
which could have a very direct impact on your
On your
revenue
investment.
profit. Absolutely. Yeah. So you have to be like almost pick it off piece by
Yeah.
piece.
That analogy of picking it off. It just, yes. And really, when you dial business inside of business, you've got growth and leadership and all these other things that we're working on constantly. It really is just that. It's piece by piece, the tower is built brick by brick,
Yeah.
right? And for the startup, entrepreneur, that looks like, it never goes fast enough. There's always, a lack of systems and a little bit of craziness. And for that person to really catch wind, like you said earlier, is really to be able to bring in someone else to
Yeah.
separate them, the crazy entrepreneur visionary, from the day to day because they're just creating too much chaos and there has to be order. And then the reverse of everything that you've just said is when you're able to make a purchase like this, you still, again, it's it's piece by piece. It's just way more strategic because all the craziness has already kind of happened, and you're kind of bringing in a little taste of it, but you're bringing in order in a new, fun, creative way, yet creating another level of opportunity for people, which is always going to be chaotic. Another level is always chaotic to a degree. That's why visionaries like it. We like going to the next level. What does that mean? It means I'm gonna create a
Yeah.
mess. Okay, great. Let's do it. You know what I mean?
It's so true. Yeah, it's so true.
It's like, what mess can I create today? And and some of my companies, I have integrators, and they just
Mm.
cringe and they're like, oh, please no, please no mess today, please.
Like, I enjoy it. It's fun. I'm good at it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
There's momentum, I think, in what you've described that you've done, obviously. There's momentum in startups as well. The horizon looks different. The tasks,
Mm.
look different. And so what would you say for the person that's been kind of, listening in on your journey, kind of us going back and forth on systems and people and team building, and they're wondering, is it worth it? Like you said, you had to raise money, and it just seems like
Mm.
it just seems really out there to go buy a $3 million business. They're listening right now doing, 300,000 or 400,000. Like, how do they get over that hump of even believing that they can do what you've done?
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't actually raise money. So all of my acquisitions, I mean, certainly at the beginning, I had no money. I haven't taken outside investment. All of my
Misunderstood.
acquisitions have been done in a way in which the considerations of the value for the business has been a mixture of seller note, so
Oh,
vendor
sure.
finance,
Yeah.
and other ways in which like the value can be paid through the business itself.
Yeah.
So and I started doing this out of necessity more than anything else because I didn't have any money. Like,
Right.
but also I've come to realize that it's a key mechanism for protecting your risk and protecting the downside. Because, and I have had this conversation so many times with sellers, is that you want me to pay, a very healthy six figure, maybe seven figure, like depending on the business
Yeah.
for your business. But why don't I just go and buy a property or two properties or three properties? At least with that, I have bricks and mortar.
Yep.
The risk I have is that if I buy your business, I'm essentially buying a bunch of contracts. I'm buying some data on a bit of software that I can't actually physically touch. And there's a team, yeah, and there's a team of people there who have the
Who could leave
God-given
tomorrow?
right of free will. Exactly. They could leave. And so you want me to go and take a substantial amount of money and pay that to you, but in a month's time, this could be completely different. Like, would you do that? And the question, if someone says yes, I mean, you just walk out of the room like that. It's not going to happen. You don't want it to happen, but they inevitably say no, I wouldn't. And so with all of this, like if you are at that two, three, four, maybe even 500 like revenue level, then just realize that that's exactly where I was at with this. Exactly. I mean, the revenue of my startup that was my most successful one because it didn't fail. That was 230,000, and I wasn't making a penny. I really wasn't. But I done this because I could see a way in which it could be structured, and that's where the secret sauce is in this, how you structure the acquisition, where I could do it without any risk, and I could have a like a different, different approach it from a different angle. So
Yeah.
it's so worth it. It's so worth it. The final thing I'll say on this is that it like it sort of comes out the other end, because then when you understand and you build the skill set, and I truly believe every entrepreneur should have this skill set, they should be able to understand how to acquire as part of their growth strategy.
Yeah.
The problems come out the other end in the sense that you can actually scale quite quickly. But I heard a term yesterday when listening to a podcast that I absolutely loved, which was I wouldn't wish scaling on my worst enemy. And so it's, scaling a business is tough, but you've just been given the keys to be able to scale really
Fast.
quickly. So
Yeah.
you're met with a very different type of challenges that certainly I was completely unprepared for, because I just wanted like growth, growth, growth.
Right. Yeah, there's a there's a I almost said the word balance. I'm gonna get to that here in a second. I don't believe in the word balance. But there's a level somewhere in here where it's like a recognition of okay, it can't just be naive. Let's let you, like you said, you gave me the keys, let's go fast. It's like, well, wait a second. Do you know how to drive? Right? Do you know how to drive this automobile? Do you know how to drive this automobile on this particular road? And where are we going? How long are we going? How much fuel do we have? Like, there's just a lot of factors that go in before we just jump in the car, put the keys in, and go. What are some of those things? Because this is like we just opened up another can. I was I was heading a different direction, but you've stopped me in my tracks because I remember in early years, all I wanted to do was get the next franchise location, then just the next one, the
Yeah.
next one, the next one. And I'm 24 starting. By the time I was 29, I had 7 locations in 3 states. Now I didn't have any seller, situations. I probably could have done a whole lot faster, which would have, I mean, looking back, thank goodness I didn't, because instead of having 7 locations, I
Mhm.
would have had 70, and it would have been just a ginormous mess, because growth equaled mess for real, because I didn't quite understand what I understand now, which is kind of what you're hinting at. So what are those things that maybe the listener doesn't know that you and I both know now, being on the other side of it?
In
In
terms of
terms of the
scaling
growth,
and
yeah, and the scaling being, yeah, don't wish scaling on your worst enemy.
yeah, yeah. So it's yeah. I mean, it's brilliant and it's so sexy to talk about buying a business, and you could buy two of them and put them together, and you're like, yes, this makes so much sense, and I can go from essentially nothing, as I did in the children's education space, complete standing start, complete newbie, had no experience other than sitting there with EV classes, through to multi-million revenue. Currently, we're around 20 odd employees, and that achieved in like 24 months, just over 24 months.
Yeah.
Huge growth. And we actually are collectively, our franchise networks, we have 70 franchisees. So
Wow.
you've got the 20 employees plus the 70 franchisees and their stuff. So all of a sudden, there's a lot of moving plates. And the reason you acquire these businesses and want to bring them together in particular is because you're looking for synergies. So you've like, oh, why pay for two finance people when I can just have the one who can do both of them, and I can make a saving there. But synergies in acquisitions can be yeah, certainly theoretical. Trying to actually utilize them can be very challenging. And I think it's a very similar principle with scaling, regardless of whether you are scaling organically or scaling through acquisition, because you do inevitably hit a point where you have revenue generators in your business. Then all of a sudden, you need to hire admin, you need to hire managers, and basically, you need to hire non revenue generators, and
Right.
you start to dip from a profitable place to an unprofitable place.
Mm.
And so that in itself is extremely stressful, is extremely challenging, and it's tough. It is tough. This is where acquisitions can actually help you to leapfrog a little bit, because if you can add 1 million or 2 million in revenue in essentially 2 or 3 months, brilliant. Like we've now got the cash flow to hire those managers, but now you've got a whole bunch of different problems over here with like the integration. And so what I've learned is that it's all tough. It's all There's no easy way to this.
No.
And quite simply, it's about choosing the approach and that best aligns to your skill sets. So
Yeah.
for me, it was acquisitions, but I also recognize that myself in the business, in the day to day, as we touched on earlier, it's going to be terrible. So I structure things in a way so that I'm out of the day to day and I can focus more on the good bits. But yeah, it's
I think your honesty around this whole thing, and you're very concise in how you've described the steps that you've taken. I think for the listener right now, the takeaway is what you just said. It's find out really what fits you, right? Because really, entrepreneurs, we're super capable.
mm,
You're the visionary can do a startup. It's been done millions of times. The visionary can take over a business. It's been done many times. And so you really kind of just have to, like you said, dial it down to what it is that you want, what fits your skill set, or what fits the target that you're after. Is it a lifestyle business? Is it a portfolio of companies? Those are different day to day tasks. Your day to day looks completely different from somebody who's, working in, a marketing new campaign, type of a thing. So, and I think that you've given just a beautiful opportunity for us as entrepreneurs to just ask ourselves some questions, right?
mm,
And then the acquisition piece is painted as oh, I can get to leapfrog, but, and we got to fill in that but here in a couple of different ways, and it all comes down to it's tough. And so let me cap this all off with what you said is like everything's tough. What's been helpful for you in either scenario? So the listener right now, maybe they've got a startup, maybe they got a portfolio like you and me. How do they get through the tough, or how have you gotten through the tough that maybe they can mimic?
absolutely. So there's two things here, and one of them is a book suggestion, if that's okay.
Yeah, I love it.
So I'll start with the book because this book is probably like I've read like a lot of entrepreneurs, so many business books, and in fact, I was organising them all over the weekend because like they've had to go into a separate storage because there's literally hundreds of them. And there's been one book that has clearly stood out as I've never seen it so well articulated, the journey that an entrepreneur takes from startup through to like 7 or 8 figures. And the book is called Ready, Fire, Aim by Michael Matheson. And in that book, he essentially talks about the journey from startup to a million revenue. And ultimately, it's about focus. It's about one product, ideally one customer base, and you'll just repeating. And it's brilliant because so many entrepreneurs at that stage have like you ask them what do you do? And they're like, oh, I've got multiple businesses, but they're not making any money
Right.
because they have multiple businesses. And Alex Hormozy talks about this all the time, and he's so absolutely right. Like one business, one customer base, ideally one product or service, nail it. Like put the basic system in place and just repeat. That will get you to a million. And I've not seen anything that has gone against that. Like it's every business I've looked at, and again, I've looked at hundreds upon hundreds of small businesses, and I've spoken to most of the owners, and it's always been the same. When you get north of a million, then you're starting to think about, different markets or different product sets or service sets. And this book basically just goes into that in a really digestible way that was such a like it pulled the curtains back for me personally. So I'd highly recommend it. Um, the second thing is that I touched on it earlier with that I recognized quite early. Well, I say early, it took me 12 startups and 10 years, so it wasn't early at all thinking about it.
In fact, that was banging in my head for a while, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That I was the biggest bottleneck.
Yeah.
And we all are, if we're honest, we're all the biggest bottleneck. And so what that done was I started to shift my focus because I knew I was buying businesses. There was an opportunity to not even be in the business before you even got it. And so that's great. So how do you then spend your time if you've got more free time on your hands because you're not in the business? And what I started to do was to really focus on personal development and growing me. And it's been amazing because that's been the second secret sauce that has just exploded stuff. It's like the more I focused on getting fit, getting healthy, reading, meditating, like journal, like all of that good stuff,
Mhm.
it had a direct reflection in the businesses, and I wasn't even trying to do it. And so I see so many entrepreneurs, and again, this was me. Like out of the entire priority list, I was always the bottom. I was so unwell in many ways. Like I was like wasn't keeping in shape. I was stressed. I was certainly my earlier year like drinking far too much as a support mechanism. I've been teetotal for 5.5 years now. Like all of this stuff that I was doing to cope with the struggles of being an entrepreneur, but actually they were the very things that were holding me back.
Yeah.
And so you get yourself in line and your business will reflect that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've one of our newest campaigns is around self-mastery, and I've kind of
Mm,
painted this picture around, first off, obviously Gathering the Kings is a pure mastermind group. So the first problem that we solve is the isolation, right? So like you and I both know what it's like to sit in the office early, late, middle of the day, whatever. It's heavy decisions. We're typically the only one. There's just a lot of weight there. And most of the listeners probably listening right now can go, yeah, I've been there. The bigger the business gets, the heavier that gets. That's just the reality. It doesn't mean that we shy away from it. It just means that we're by ourselves. There's no one else like us. So once we solve that problem, then it's like, okay, now we can start really pressing into you as the individual, right? And mastering self. And I don't mean, like, yes, there's habits and disciplines and there's mindset and we can break down thinking we're rich and all the 13 principles, but like there's just a lot of work that you can do continually for the rest of your life around you. And all the things that you just said, Adrian, have were like spot on. And once you have those pieces, it's not that you grab them all at once. Like it's a learning process, and you
mhm.
apply them into all the areas of our life. And I have just found once you do that over a long enough period of time, you start really winning, not just in business, but in your marriage, and in your family. You talked about with your
Mm.
daughter and with all the with your health, and maybe there's faith and lifestyle and just the things that bring you joy. Like when you really start winning in all of those areas, that's what we call the exceptional life, because it that's what we're after. Like when we think about back when we started the business to begin with, even the ones that failed, it was like, what did I have in my mind? Well, I
Mm.
had hope. I had like a little glitter, little like sparkle of hope, a sparkle of freedom, time, money, money, freedom, like whatever it was that I wanted. It was like, man, I believed that I could do it, and then I got hit by a truck,
Yeah.
which is what you just described. And so we kind of got to like pull ourselves out from underneath the truck, and revive, because that's what I heard you say. You said you start focusing on other things that really build you so that you could go build the business. Am I right?
You again, you hit the nail on the head. And I like before we started recording, I loved it when we jumped on the call because you said, "Oh, there's a lot going on, but I still got my morning routine in." And I've had exactly the same day. Like, there's so much going on, but I've prioritized myself every single day, and I've done me. So by the time I get to the business stuff, I'm okay because I've done me. I've done myself. And so I'm going into stuff at a much higher version of myself. And so
Yeah.
you can see problems differently. You have more clarity, and then you have the confidence to follow through on your decisions and the changes you inevitably need to make. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it's been such a game changer for me. It's like the more I focus on myself, the more the business grows
Yeah.
because you are the bottlenecks.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, Adrian, you have given us so much. I mean, I could just take that little piece and we could run for like 3 more hours, but you've only given me a short amount of time, and I'm appreciative of that. You've got companies that are counting on you, so I got to let you get back to them. How can the
Mm.
listener find you? Number one, if they're in and around the UK and they're in the child education space, how or why would they want to get connected to you? And then if they're an entrepreneur, they just enjoyed the conversation, they want to find you, get to know you better. How can they find you that way as well?
Absolutely. So, I mean, in terms of our franchise networks, we have locations all across the country, Scotland down to the very south coast. We're also in Ireland. We also have some locations in Australia and a couple in the Middle East as well. So, if you happen to be in the Middle East, think of us. But yeah, so the best way to get hold of me personally, because I'm not in the day to day, I'm not at any of these locations, these are where our classes are at. The best way to get hold of me personally is either through my website, which is adrianknight.co.uk, and that's Knight with a K, or social media. I'm extremely active on social media, most especially Instagram, where I post several times a day. I try to share like the realities of what this life looks like, and also the personal challenges that I face, like anxiety, or I just earlier on posted about not facing certain problems, so I cleared my morning to face those problems. So my social media handles are, it's Adrian J Knight, and it's the same for Instagram, LinkedIn, and I've only just got onto TikTok, so bear with me there.
Sounds good, man. Well, we'll make sure all that's super accessible for the listener. You've been incredible. I personally am looking forward to just a continued relationship with you. Obviously, our mindsets around team building and businesses, and even just personal development are very much in tune. And I can't wait to be able to grow as an individual by learning from you further after this conversation. So thank you for being here. Blessings to your family, blessings to each one of your portfolio companies and all the teams that you have working out there for the good of many children and other industries here today. Thank you for being here, brother.
Thank you so much, Chaz. It's been a real, genuine pleasure and honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Gathering the Kings today. I hope that you were able to pull out a few nuggets to go apply into your business right away. More importantly, though, I hope that you're realizing that it takes more to be successful than just being by yourself, doing it all on your own, carrying the weight all by yourself. What I have realized, not only in my own journey from multiple businesses and multiple different industries, and now interviewing over 200 or 300 other very successful 7, 8, and 9-figure business owners, is that it's tough to do it alone. And so Gathering the Kings exists to bring together successful entrepreneurs. In fact, we are putting together 1,000 kings, specifically who are grateful but not done. We're intentionally assembling kings who fight tooth and nail for their business, family, and communities. And here's what we believe: that in the pursuit of excellence in those areas, that it ignites within us the responsibility to govern power and forge a lasting legacy. So if that relates and resonates with you, and you know that you need people around you, sharp, qualified, other very successful business owners, I want you to go to gatheringthekings.com. I want you to take a look at what we're doing and see if it makes sense for you to be part of our pursuit to 1,000 kings. Talk soon.